Well, everybody, happy Wednesday and welcome back to Double Trouble with Jessie. So, we're going to be chatting in the first show about the land grabs in Minnesota, and I'm very interested to hear from Jess what that's about because I think there's some big reveals waiting there to happen, yeah? And then, of course, on the second show, we're going to do a Q&A. So, yeah, bring your questions along and we will get through as many of them as possible. But before comes along, just going to pop up the schedule for this week. So, yeah, if you missed Monday's show with Beverly Rose, again, very interesting. We were talking a lot about her experience being a vampire nanny and really helps us understand from someone that's had experience with that. I mean, I got to tell you, there's nothing that creeps me out more than thinking about a vampire sinking its teeth into me, seriously. But there's so much more than that, and it's just the way she explains it as well. And of course, if you guys missed Jamie J last night, gosh, my internet was so bad, but at least I could hear nothing. But she, at least, I know, put it, the viewers, you guys could hear her. So great show there. She's a researcher on all the MK Ultra and all of that stuff and the programming. So she really has some great information. And then, of course, Jessie today, Dennis Carroll at 6 o'clock tomorrow, Central Africa time. And then new guest again, Dr. Juliet Engel, also amazing lady, Montauk survivor. So, wow, really very interesting information coming from her as well. Doctor, she spent time in Russia working on these programs. So lots of very interesting people coming to the fore now. And yay, Friday, the launch of Honeycomb Tailed Adventures from the Ankara Field. That's my first kiddies book it's actually a storybook. It's amazing. So that's launching on Friday. And then, yes, Sunday, the loop. But keep an eye, there might well be a couple of extra guests that I do recordings with, and we'll pop them on the schedule as well sometime during the course of the week. So, yay! Hope to catch you guys with all our shows. And without any further ado, ta-da,
Hello,
Madame, how
hello.
are you?
Doing well.
That's fantastic. Nice to see you again. And what's been
Yes.
happening in your world and what is happening in your world?
Yeah, so much I've got coming up. I encourage people to visit my website, the kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. Starting tomorrow evening, I've got the next series in my workshops, uh, Lord Make Us One, which is going to be a great dynamic series on covenant relationships. We're going to have a couple guests coming on that will share from their experiences. Some of the things we'll cover will be like codependency. You know, how do you deal with issues of that or issues of addictions in your relationships? Then, you know, a couple that they're doing it right. You know, what is a good, healthy relationship supposed to look like when you're walking in covenant? So, lots of it's packed full of great information. I do have a commercial up on the website if people want to find out more about that, but it starts tomorrow evening and then every Thursday this month. And then November 7th through 9th, I have an event in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So you can see that too. But we're going to do a good old fashioned Christmas. One of my favorite things is making Christmas cookies. I have been wanting to do this for so long, but that was something I always, you know, had fun doing with my kids and, you know, brings back a lot of good memories, that and food, of course. So, you know, the carols, singing carols together, hearing the Christmas story, all of those things that are precious to many of us, you know, we're going to just
Yeah.
enjoy having together and being community and family. So I encourage people to look into that and join us for that.
It's almost, you know, when you're speaking about Christmas now, I'm thinking, but this is a very long way away.
It
And
is,
then I
right? I
remember,
know.
yes,
We're gonna,
and then I remember we're in October. I mean, I'm
right.
still sitting somewhere in March.
It's not that far, and like November's a lot closer, but
That's my point. It's like I cannot believe how this year has flown. It's insane.
yeah,
Wow.
time goes
Wow.
fast.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Awesome. Do you want to open for us in prayer?
Let's do it. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for this time together. We ask that you would bless our conversation today as we really dive into things that are happening, not just in the state of Minnesota, but all around the world, Lord. We ask that you would help us to have wisdom and knowledge and understanding into these things, that you would give us vision and direction to know how to correct them. And we ask, Lord, for that insight. We thank you again for this time together, and we ask that you would bless our airwaves, bless our technology, bless our internet. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jessie. And thank you,
Yeah.
everybody, for joining us. It's always such fun to see you guys in the chats. All my lovely wenches with wenches and those without. Even if you're a wench, that's cool.
Right.
We're all got a bit of a wench in us, I think.
So true. I just like that word.
Exactly. It says so much without swearing, right?
Right. I never considered that a swear word, but
Exactly, exactly. So that's, you know, that's the beauty about speaking Afrikaans. Okay, because I mean, Afrikaans is like a derivative of German, Dutch, and a bit of English. So it's quite strong Germanic, right? But there's words in Afrikaans that sound horrific, but they mean nothing. But you can use them when you want to swear. And it sounds like you're swearing, but you're not. They're just so expressive. So that's one of the
that's
reasons
funny.
why we love speaking Afrikaans. I think we will start teaching you guys some Afrikaans lingo here. Goeiemôre almal. Hoe gaan dit met julle vanmiddag? Of goeiemiddag. Actually. Good afternoon. How are you all this afternoon?
Right, that does sound kind of aggressive. I mean, it's kind of like one of my favorite phrases in Swahili too, the una fanya nini. It's
Yeah,
like it sounds like that, even though it's like, what are you doing? But you can say it. Silly.
exactly. Exactly. No, Afrikaans is quite a guttural sounding language. So
Yeah.
you can use it to your heart's content. Anyway, yay! So we are doing the Minnesota land grabs, and we're checking into that today. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, this is going to be an extensive series, but it's so important to understand this information and, what do we do with it once we know? So, there's been some stuff starting to come out about this area. Um, I've done some talking about the Austin, Minnesota area, but we're going to continue in that deep dive and we'll see some of this, I think, as you pick up stuff, some of this may transpose even, to other states, to, maybe even internationally, how they've been doing things with the brotherhood system and the sovereign military. So, yeah, so let's get started on it. So, as we start, a lot of the information that I have, including the special reports, you'll find on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. I do want to encourage one last time my latest event, the Lord Make Us One workshop. And if you're a fan of my ministry partner, Terry Brown's artwork and journals, the picture that you see there is the latest cover that we have for her newest journal. So those are available on the website as well. All right, go ahead to the next one. So as we get into the Minnesota land grab, we're going to find that it extends into the waterways. And really what we're talking about is how the money flows and the water rights. And we're talking about the theft of those rights from we the people. So last time when we spoke, we had brought out some information in our wind mill series, or the wind fans farms. We talked about the 12 Minnesota municipal utilities, and we've got a map there again showing where the majority of those are in that state. Go ahead to the next one. So to give a little background, in order to have energy, the power companies need water and they need a heat source, fire. On the side there, you're going to see some of the different maps that I have. Up on the very top, we have a map that shows where the Minnesota hydro facilities are. And we see that, you know, the location of those co-aligns with what we saw on the first slide of the locations for a lot of the utilities. You know, that middle area is really a hot spot for a lot of these utilities, and then that energy is outsourced throughout the state. On the bottom left, we see the transmission zones established in the following way. You can kind of see how they're established there. You've kind of got 6 main areas that they've done. Then on the right, we see a map where it shows your Minnesota Energy Services, you know, those companies. So, you know, there's a lot of overlap in certain areas. And remember when we went through the sigil for this state, there was some important information that showed us about the brotherhood in the area, that, you know, on the bottom of that state sigil, which, go ahead to the next one, I think it shows, yeah, there it is, that bottom right corner, we see that sigil for the state of Minnesota. And remember, we talked about that middle area where all the words are, that when you see like a diamond or wording, and it used to be wording, or I'm sorry, numbers, like dates on the bottom, very bottom there. So when you see that, it tells us that there's hidden underground submarine lines. And then where we see above the mountains, that 4-pointed star, that also tells us in that area underground, there's, you know, underground massive submarine hub. So, you know, keep that in mind as we think about this, you know, the location of those two things. On this, we see, you know, look at that top left map there. Where do you see, you know, those hydro companies? Like, look at on the kind of the, as we're looking at the state and we see, you know, the Great Lakes coming in there, on the side of that, you know, we see a whole cluster of hydro companies on the side there. And right where that star is in those mountains on our state seal. And then we know down at the bottom too, there's an outlet, and you get a submarine line that goes all the way up to the top of the state, like kind of where those middle hydro lines are, and then all the way down. And then when we compare that to the map where the nuclear power plants are, we see that the Monticello nuclear plant is right in the midst of all those hydro plants as well. And then they have another one further down that's in direct alignment with the, you know, those upper kind of on your side hydro plants on the right side there that we were just looking at. So, you know, we know that those nuclear plants and facilities, they also need water in order to run. You have two major ones in that area, the Monticello and the Prairie Island one, but there's a few others that are up towards that side that we looked at that are not on here, near the Cloquet area. They have another one that they're kind of not identifying or marking per se on some of these maps. So go ahead to the next one. So they steal the water because the states own the patents for the fresh water. And when I say they, we're talking about a foreign government, a foreign military that's, infiltrated our government federally. In every branch, you have the executive, the legislative, the judicial, and you have brotherhood and sovereign military getting into that. We also have the military, which they've infiltrated. Then at your state or your local levels, that's what we're looking at now, that the infiltration even stems down to there. So, they steal our rights because the states own the patents for the fresh water. And this does not include the mineral rights and never has and never was intended to. But what water does, this includes, according to Minnesota statutes 505.021 and 103A.201, dams and reservoirs. So when we're talking about the water rights that they're stealing, we're talking about the freshwater lakes, the streams, the dams, the reservoirs, the drainage easements, and all natural water sources, including swamplands and rivers. It goes by, the water elevations when they're doing this, and we're going to explain further what that looks like. But it includes water considered under the surface, like swamplands and basins. It also includes the Great Lakes. Why do they need the water? They need it to cool, direct, and conduct. The water rights were given to the residents of the state, however. So, where do the water rights, who do they really belong to? It's supposed to be to we, the people who live in the state. So if you live in the state of Minnesota, it is your right to use and access the waters that are in the lakes or the streams, any natural water resources, whether that's for drinking, bathing, fishing. You have a right to use those waterways. However, the General Land Office, can give patents for swamps, timber, land, and schools. So we're going to see how some of our general offices begin to come into play and how they're stealing our rights and our access to these waterways, through what they're doing. All right, go ahead to the next one here. So the state oversight, the waterways are in trust for the people of the state. The Department of Revenue or the state auditor oversee the processes of this trust, right? So, it is naturally your right to access the waterways that are in your state. However, that is going to be overseen by the Department of Revenue and or the state auditor. So what they oversee, it includes procedures and the recording of those procedures, including requirements to be met in every document. So, they have to keep track as they do things with the waters and the rights. They have to record that and make that public record. So you have access to go and see those public records. You should be able to know exactly what they're doing with the land and the water and the procedures. You should be able to look at those documents and know that they have followed proper procedure. It all should be open and transparent. You should be able to see who owns the lands surrounding certain areas. You should be able to know, where those waterways are and where you can go fishing, where things are zoned off for drinking water or for utilities, so everybody can access. So they're going to manage the recorders, the auditors, so this is your Department of Revenue, are going to manage the recorders, the auditors, the treasurer, and the assessor, who all have to sign off on documents when they transfer a piece of property. Well, the Minnesota Water Board or Commission, so now we've got a third party apart from the Department of Revenue. They're also part of the Board of Water and Soil Resources. They're going to be responsible for setting water policies and programs in the state of Minnesota. And they operate the St. Paul Board of Water Commissioners and St. Paul Water System. So this is who has the oversight. And we see in the background there, that's the sigil or the logo, the seal that the Department of Revenue is recognized by. All right, go ahead to the next one. So as we begin to look at this further, on the side there, I've got an example of a patent. That's, what the patents look like. And, at the very top of that patent, you can't see it very clearly, but at the very top, kind of the middle, you have a number there that it will be recognized by. Then on the right-hand side of that document, it gives details and information about, the county recorder, which state it's being documented in, and then it has a notice. So what it actually says in that upper right-hand corner there, it says St. Louis County Recorder, State of Minnesota, and then the recorder has a little statement, I hereby certify that within instrument was filed in this office for record as document, and it has the document number, which is up there in the middle, again on the side there. It gives the date, the time, and then the county recorder puts their name, and if there's a deputy, they'll put their name there as well. Then in the middle, it says State of Minnesota, Department of Natural Resources, and it has the date. And then it says, I hereby certify that I have carefully compared and attached a copy of Swampland patent and the patent number with the copy on record of Swampland Patents book. So all of, the patents have to be documented, kept in books, in records. So it's all identified, and it says, pages 1 through 23 inclusive, which is a file and of record in the office of Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, the Bureau of Estate Management, and find the same to be full, true, and correct copies thereof. And then you get all the signatures, of the program's operator manager, of the notary public, and that is considered the record. So as we begin to look at this, originally all land was divided by patents through the patent office. To get a patent in your name, you would stand in line at the patent office. But then what happened is that power, rather than people just going to the patent office, standing in line and getting a patent for land, you had the power was transferred from the patent office to the recorder's office. That changed ownership and the process of how they recorded ownership and the transfers of land. Instead of it getting a patent for the land, one now gets a deed from the prior owner, and it is recorded at the recorder's office. So there's a shift in how things are done, and this shift is really important for us to understand. Go ahead to the next one. So on the side there, we have an example still carrying on page 2 of that patent there. So at the very top, again in the middle, you see that patent number that it is identified by. Then right in the middle underneath there, you'll see the United States of America. On the left-hand side, you've got little words there that say entered on new swampland books. And then what it says is to all to whom these present, able come, greeting, whereas by the act of Congress approved September 28th, 1830, entitled an act to enable the state of Arkansas and other states to retain the swamplands within their limits, and the act of Congress approved on March 12th, 1860, entitled Other States to retain the swamplands within the limits to Minnesota and Oregon and for other purposes. So we're going to get back to that. But let's look at, as we continue to follow the oversight, the original was that everybody would go to the patent office, then things shifted to the recorder's office. So it's important to understand that when the process changed, at the same time, the Department of Revenue came into play. So prior to this, you didn't have the Department of Revenue or overseeing anything. You just had the patent office. But when things shifted to there being a recorder's office, that's when the Department of Revenue came into play. Along with it, a very old act called the Stamp Act came into play, and it was created in 1765. The Stamp Act is a British law that imposes a direct tax on the American colonies. So think about that, way back to when there was 13 colonies. It's a tax that basically for paper documents, newspapers, and playing cards to help pay for the 7-year war. Now, I don't know about you, but my first question is what in the world? I want to know if this Stamp Act is still ongoing today, but how can it lawfully still be ongoing? The 7-year war is way over. I mean, it's been over for a long time, right? There's been no change to the Stamp Act, but the other big thing about this is British law. Why are we being taxed under a British law? This is ridiculous. We're not under the king or the queen. So, our taxes are supposed to go to our states to, in order to prosper and benefit we the people for certain things that, our states are going to do. But this is something that, is, as we look into this further, we're going to see there's a lot of corruption with this. They never stopped it. It came into play through Congress, and I encourage you, look up the Stamp Act in Congress. They met in New York and established this. The other thing I want to bring out that we'll have to get into with a further show, but it's interesting that this act includes that they put a tax on playing cards. And that is significant when we get into the rotational rituals of the Brotherhood system, because they have the way that they set things up within the quadrants. And some of you, if you, especially those who are familiar with some of the different tarot card things, some of this may sound familiar to you. But they identify quadrants in the system in connection to the playing cards. In your playing cards, you have your top royal suit, which are, first you have 4 suits. You have the hearts, the diamonds. So 2 suits are red, 2 suits are black, your spades and your clubs. Um, you know, the same thing in the system, what those represent, you've got, you know, kind of 2 factions that are kind of going to be considered light side. You've got 2 factions that are going to be considered dark side. Or another way to put that, the way your quadrants in the United States and internationally are kind of labeled or seen, you know, within your United States, you're going to have, you know, 2 quadrants be labeled as light side, 2 quadrants being labeled as dark side, the same internationally. Some of the symbols that are used to signify those specific quadrants are the same as playing cards. You have hearts, you have your diamonds, you have your spades, and you have your clubs. And this became a way, you know, they could, through games or cards, pass information to one another without that being directly known. And there's a game that they would play, a card trick, where you know, they would establish things that, you know, each you have your aces, which represent the castles. So each quadrant is connected to a castle or a mansion. Then you're going to have the major players in the system, your grand high priest and priestesses, that oversee that. Now, how they're signified is that, you know, each castle has its king, each king has his queen, and each queen has her jack. That's the power structure. When you get into ritual rotation, each of those are identified where you have like you have your queen of swords, you have your queen of the wand. They'll have a little symbol for each one, the same with your kings and your knights. And then that gets into the seasonal ritual rotations, who's in charge of hosting the ceremonies for that year. So it's almost like a Russian roulette rotation that they'll do, but that's how they'll communicate it, is through those signs and symbols. So I found that interesting, and was, you know, my mind goes to, if playing cards and attacks on playing cards was, you know, connected to this Stamp Act, is this a way that they're paying for the ritual rotations within some of the quadrant areas through these taxes that they're putting in connection to the paper when, you know, deeds are transferred or titles are transferred, everything that goes back to this act. So that's something that we need to look into and find out further, because it may explain more of further of how they're doing it. But let's go on to the next one here. And I know that's a lot as we're getting into this. So let's get further into the creation of the Department of Revenue. And notice some of your symbols, like you just kind of catch it in this picture, but all the way on your left side in the middle there, we'll get into a little bit further into the Stamp Act symbols, but one of their symbols connected to this Stamp Act, you have, you know, judges that are in that picture, but you also have skull and bones as one of their symbols. And we know that that goes back to certain orders within the Brotherhood system. But for the creation of the Department of Revenue, once the state decided they could do the Stamp Act through Congress, now each state is going to collect on that Stamp Act. So they had to create the Department of Revenue. Why? Because that's part of what the Department of Revenue does. They oversee the county auditors and the collection of the money from the Stamp Act. The county auditors and the treasurer sign off on the deeds or anything that transfers property, showing that they have received it on behalf of the state. Now they have a county auditor acting on behalf of the state. Then they also have the county recorder receiving all of that and being the record keeper, so it becomes public record. The assessor goes out and puts a value attached to the property. They value the land and they value the improvements on the land. All right, so go to the next one. So furthering with the Stamp Act, we see there on the sides, again, pictures representing different images used in connection to the Stamp Act. You know, so we see the skull and bones, both in the top and on the bottom. We see, you know, in the bottom left, what looks more, you know, you've got your British crown in there with two swords forming an X. You've got more of what looks like a sigil. Basically, it's putting it under the governance kind of threefold. You have initially it going under your Knights of the Garter, because you see that middle area around the crown. That actually is a belt buckle, hidden belt buckle, and that's going to symbolize your Knights of the Garter, your Knights of the Bath, who were under the service, you know, that sovereign military under the service of the crown. The crown, the way that they have that picture, it actually is split into 4 pieces and goes back to some of your fire department symbols under your Knights of Malta, which is another sovereign military group. Now, your skull and bones is also connected to some of these sovereign military groups as well. So you're going to have both the government side of the Brotherhood as well as the sovereign military working together in connection. So let's look at that. So the Stamp Act is a taxation without representation. This is how they fund it all. If you just updated the patent like a car title into your name, there would be no taxation. You would just, you know, you would take it and you would, you know, if you were buying a car from someone, they would just give the title to you and put it in your name, update your name on it rather than the previous owners. But what they do is they take away our rights to transfer ownership via patent from one person to another. And then they profit off of a dead Stamp Act, and the patents are floating out there in la la land. I mean, that's really what happens initially. You know, when we look at the process, in each state, you have all this land. That land is all connected to patents. You know, so you have to ask what happens to the patents in all this. If we have land, we should have a patent. If we're on the land, if we've, you know, bought a home, we've bought land, we should have the patent for that. You know, but there is no oversight in all of this. You know, the patents are basically floating in la la land. Everything that they're going off of are these documents that they're recording. And because they're putting it on a new piece of paper, they're now going to tax you to put it on that new piece of paper and to record it. So there's no oversight on that as to how much taxation they can collect through this Stamp Act. There isn't a cap on that. So we're going to kind of get into that because we're talking about mass amounts of money that they're collecting off of this dead Stamp Act. The money is all generated on behalf of the state through the Department of Revenue, and the Department of Revenue decided the counties needed some money too. So remember, as we look at our states, they further broke down, rather than just state governance, they broke down each state into counties. So, you know, rather than just the state receiving the money, they now have decided the counties need some of that money too. So they split the money between the state and the county. This is your state deed tax. This is done through the recorder and the county recorder fee. In Minnesota, it is $46 for each document. Okay, now let's get into some of the math of this. Go ahead to the next one.
I can't help but comment on just what a
Yeah.
charming bunch of embezzlers these are. My word.
Right, when we really look at it and break it down, it's, you know, it seems like such a small amount of money, right? And
Wow.
we
Not,
don't even question, or, you know, we don't even question. We don't even look at, we don't even ask the question, like, how can they still be applying a dead tax to us? How can they tax us without representation? You know, that's a stealing of our rights. And they're doing it for, this is the sad part, over a piece of paper. Do you honestly think it cost the $46 for all of that to be done? You know, versus
never.
if you just simply, even if you had a new one, you know, it's like, why are we having to pay just to have it kept on the books and the records, right? Um, when that was initially, it could just be transferred. You know,
Oh.
at the patent office, they have a new patent and it's documented that you own that patent. So,
Money,
go ahead.
money, sorry, I'll just end off by saying money really is their God. We can see that now.
Yeah, yeah. So let's break down that $46 fee for paper, right? Um, Part goes to the state treasury. Part of that fee is going to go to your technology fund now, because now it's not just on paper, but so here, think about this, think about the deception in that, right? What does the Stamp Act initially cover? It covers for paper or documents, right? But what now are they applying it to? They're going to put those documents online. So now they have to have a technology fund. Well, who oversees that? Who watches over how much money is going in for that, right? So part also goes to your county's general fund. The state deed tax is based on the value of the property and what you sold it for. So the value fee is $3.30 per $1,000. So for every, you know, whatever your property is valued at, you know, they're going to apply a $3.30 tax for every $1,000. So, so for example, if you sell your house, and I just kind of took some averages here from the state of Minnesota, the average house sells for about $300,000 right now. Okay. So, you know, the state then from that would receive a state deed tax of $990. That $990 goes to the state under the Stamp Act and is distributed to all the parties we just said above. It is a tax without representation and is collected on every transfer. Think of how many properties are sold in a county per year. Let's look at this. And again, this is just, you know, general. We're kind of taking an average here. So let's go to the next one and look at the multiplication of this fee. Um, so let's look at Anoka County there in Minnesota. This is Anoka County home sales in 2022. So Anoka County had over 5,700 home sales in 2022. The average property sale in Anoka County, Minnesota is $343,000. So you times the 343,000 times 5,700 sales, right? What does that equal? 1,955, or I'm sorry, let me restate that. 1,955,100,000, almost $2 billion for this county. Anoka County is a small county in Minnesota. So for Anoka County, for the 5,700 home sales that sold at on an average of $43,000, they earned in 2022 close to $2 billion off of this Stamp Act taxes that are not represented. You know, so Anoka County just so happens to be also your Halloween capital of the world. That's a lot of money. It gets much bigger than this, because think about that. That's just one county in Minnesota. How much money is the state bringing in home sales in their counties every year? We're talking, how many counties are there in Minnesota? I encourage you guys to look that up. We're talking billions of dollars.
$2 billion
in taxes.
in fraudulent taxes.
And this is just looking at the state of Minnesota, for the people of Minnesota. That's just the people of Minnesota, what they stole in 2022 from Anoka County.
Now, my question is that the parties that this money gets redistributed to, what do they do with it? Is it for their personal use? Is it like bonuses, or does it get reinvested in the county in other areas? Because if it did get reinvested in the county in other areas, such as the upkeep of, I don't know, memorial sites or whatever the case might be, you know, that I could somehow reconcile. Not that it's right.
That's a great question. We're gonna, as we dive further, we're not gonna quite get into that today, but next week, we're gonna start to get into some of that. Where is the money going, and you'll see that how they continue to steal and how they continue to get more and more money through these home sales in the counties. You know, not only stealing the land, the water, but also taxing us for that without representation. You know, so you'll see, and it'll make you mad. It'll make you mad when we get to where we're going with this. It should make you mad, because, you know, this is all part of how they're working things regionally within the Brotherhood and the Sovereign Military Order, how they're paying for things. It's really, you know, they're using the above ground to pay for their nefarious deeds below ground, and much, much more. You know, how are they funding their mass amounts of training programs, you know, and their trafficking, and, you know, their rituals, their ceremonies? Everything is afforded to them. And this is part of how it's all afforded to them. You know, while we're put under oppression, we're barely scraping by, or we have to go out and get 2-3 jobs to make ends meet, so they can just get more money from us through different taxes. You know, so it just continues down this spiral. But let's keep going with it. Write down that question, because we'll come back to that in other episodes as well. So now let's look as we start to get into the water. You know, it's not just for the properties, but also for the water. And I want to start with this is still that second page of that patent that we looked at, but it puts out some of the things about the act, and we remember that they went through Congress and that Congress approved in September 28th of 1830, um, you know, that act enabling other states or others to be able to buy, the states to be able to buy swampland. The highlighted part, let me read that. So it says, it is provided that all the swamp and overflow lands, which we'll look at what are overflow lands, made unfit thereby by cultivation within the state of Minnesota, meaning your farmers can't cultivate on the land. Um, uh, that uh, that which remained unsold or unappropriated at the passage of the said act of March 12th, 1860, shall be granted to the states. And whereas this um, pursuance of instructions from the the General Land Office of the United States, the several tracts of parcels of land hereinafter described have been selected as swamp and overflow lands, ensuring to the said state under the acts aforesaid, being situated in the district of land subject to rule. This was in Duluth, Minnesota. So, you know, we're going to look at this process. Like, what does all that mean? You know, as we begin to get into the patents, the lands, and the lands that have water connected to them. So it used to be, you know, your farmers would use, you know, people would go into the patent office, they would get a patent for a property, and let's say that property included or was adjacent to a swampland. Um, you know, people would look for farmland. They would want to have a water source for irrigation, right? So it would be common for farmers to choose to buy a patent that would be near swampland because they would use that swamp as, you know, part of drainage or overflow, but they also could use that extra water that was in that to irrigate for their fields or their flocks. So, or sorry, fields, flocks, herds, you know, their animals. So Congress then, what does Congress do? Said that the swamps needed to remain for animals and the ecosystem. So they acknowledge that swamplands are something, you know, rather than selling the swampland to people, because nobody really wants to buy swampland. You really cannot build a house or property on there effectively. So it's not ideal land for residential, right? So they had to decide, what are we going to do? Nobody really wants to buy the swamplands. We've got all these swamplands remaining in the states, unbought, unsold. However, those swamplands are still beneficial in some way. Those properties are good, you know, if we're selling the land around that, or that's being bought up by farmers or people who have animals, you know, that's beneficial. On top of, you have a whole ecosystem connected to the swamplands. So they acknowledge that, you know, there is value even in those properties. Most of the value being connected to using it as a overflow or drainage land, or using it for farms for irrigation. Um, so they decided that the patents, you know, um, would tell people that they had to leave the water right where it was. All right, so, you know, you can't move or shift because of the ecosystem, the animals connected to it. you can't just come in and, you know, buy up that and demolish the swampland. Like you can't just have a big company come in that wants to build apartment complexes. They want to drain the swamp, get everything out of there, shift the whole ecosystem and build apartments. So they decided, you know, that the patents tell people that they have to leave the water right where it is. Um, you know, so nobody wanted to buy the swamps. They wouldn't stand in line to buy the swamps. So in this page 2 of the land patent, we see Congress gave off the unclaimed swamp and overflow lands to the states. And that was according to the act on March 12th, 1860. So if it's, you know, if these surveyors are going out, if they say, you know, they're looking at the land, they're defining the patents, they're going to look, they're going to say, okay, this is classified as swampland, and they're going to file that. Now, if nobody comes to buy that, what happens is it's unclaimed, and now that land can be given to the state, who will oversee the use of that land. The General Patents Office used to put how land could be used into the patents, so that took care of the zoning. It used to be that they would look at the layout of that land and decide to use the land based on the layout and the water elevations. Congress used to control it all, but somehow through patents they gave the control away to the states. And that was how it kind of happened, you know, was through that law. Anything unclaimed, then the state could claim that, and you know, basically then would be given the patent for the unclaimed swamps. All right, go ahead to the next one. So you also have involved in this, like let's say you've got a property, you may not just have water on that property, you have other resources, you might have other you know, others who want to do things with that property, including your public utilities. So therefore, we have to bring our Public Utilities Commission into view. Who, you know, oversees the utilities? That's going to be your Public Utilities Commission. So they're another branch of this process. They're the arm that oversees and regulates how much they can charge consumers for the utilities by a megawatt. Now, this, so this gets really deep. When you get your bills, look on your bill. You'll notice a certain thing. You're going to notice that your bill has a multiplier. All right. So what happens is that your utilities are going to distinguish now by properties on those lands or territories. They're going to classify, is the property residential or is it considered a business? And they make decisions on how big the multiplier is. Usually if you're residential, your multiplier is going to be a 1. So that means, you know, when they go out, when they read your meter, you know, and they're charging you per a megawatt, like let's just say they, you know, they charge $1 per a megawatt, you know, they go out, they do a read, it's at 20, you know, your bill's going to be $20 then, okay? But if you're a business, they're going to have a bigger multiplier. It could be like a multiplier of 4. And you know, therefore they'll read that property as in a business usage. Are they using more energy than a residential? No, they're not, right? So why are the businesses getting charged more? Why do they have a multiplier on there if the amount for a megawatt is what's to be charged, why is there a multiplier on there? So here's another way. One of the things that can happen on this is when you get the rezoning. So, like an example, there was in an area, they had a daycare that was in a house. So because the city zoned it for a business, the daycare, they had a meter and a multiplier of 4 on that building. But then they decided to, no longer use it as a daycare. They sold it to residentials, but they never changed the meter. So everybody who lived in that property continued to have a multiplier of 4 for the amount of energy that they used. Rather than a true amount, they weren't charged for the true amount. The county was making money off of that multiplier of that residential area. So if the property is changed from a business to residential, the utility still gets a multiplier of 4 for the business property through the meter zoning. Zoning is done by the patents and defines the property's specific use. Okay, so again, another area where they're, this just continues to get deeper. So go ahead to the next one. And some of this will come back around. We'll kind of continue to loop it together. But so let's look at how the utilities became a tax collector for the state. Did you know that? Did you know that your utilities are collected taxes off of you? They are. They're brought in during the first part of the process when the land patent is recorded. Utilities are regulated by the state. So, how are they brought in? It's when a property is zoned for its use, then your utilities are going to come in and say, okay, if this is a residential, all residential areas have to have sewage, water, and electricity or gas, right? So they're going to come in and they're going to put in those utilities on that land. And that happens at the beginning of the process. So the utilities are regulated by the state and become a public entity that operates under a 501c12, and they collect a state tax on energy. On electricity, so what is the energy going to be classified as? Your electricity, your natural gas, and your telecommunications, all which are underground. Think about that. All, when I talk about the layers of tunnels underground, that first layer is going to be connected to your utilities, okay? The percentage that they're going to use for this tax is 6.875% per $1. That's a lot. Your wireless and telecommunications are taxed higher at 11.92% per $1. Utilities become the tax collector for the state with no representation. So the state regulates how much they can charge, and they collect it for the state and collect the sales tax on top of that. The state defines how much they get to charge and have to pay it with tax and have so the state decides how much the utilities get to charge. We have to pay it. If we want to use the utility, we have to pay that. We don't get to vote on how much that tax is. We don't get to have a voice in that. They decide for us, and we have no representation in that matter. We just get the bill, the tax is added to our bill, and we have to pay it. All right, go to the next one. And again, like we're paying, I mean, think about that. Your energy and water are going to have one tax, the 6 point whatever, but then your telecommunications are also taxed, and you get a much higher tax at that. So let's again just look at this Anoka County. You know, this is going to include your electric, gas, and water. Again, just examples. So in this example, you know, we don't have an exact amount or average of how much your gas is taxed. So I'm kind of pulling in, we're taken from what they say the average for the electric bill is per residential. But, you know, this is given you may have some of this being taxed, uh, you know, with gas. So we're just kind of giving examples that hypothetical, if every home in Anoka County had electric gas, right? The average electric bill for residential is about $178 per a month. Okay, that's their average electric bill, they say. So when we times that times your 6.875%, you know, that's going to equal per month, each residential paying $12.24 in taxes. So let's look at how many homes are in Anoka County. There's approximately 81,374 homes. This, again, is an estimate. Not all of these may be electric, but let's just say they were, right? So that would be approximately $1 million per a month just in sales tax, just in Anoka County, that the electric company is collecting for Anoka County in sales tax or in taxes per residential home. $1 million per month that Anoka County is collecting in energy taxes. Your electric company's collecting this.
Wow.
That's crazy. That's crazy. What are they doing with this money? You know, we really need to ask that, you know, and this again, just one county in Minnesota. What about others? How much money is that across all the states? I think, is that our last slide there?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, so go ahead,
insane.
take it off and let's talk about this. Let's just, I mean, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? And this
it's
is
like,
not, it doesn't stop there, Chanti. Like, there's more money.
and again, you know, and I know we're going to get into it later, so it's more a rhetoric question. It's like, where is this money going? Because if it's being reinvested into the county, or as I said, you know, into historical sites or something like that, where at least everyone is benefiting,
But
right?
think about this. Who oversees the historical sites?
Exactly.
You
Well,
have
it's true.
that being classified under your USAID or UNESCO, which is connected to your United Nations. Why would that money go to prosper or to set things culturally, you know, set it apart, classify it as a world cultural or arts area, right? Why would it be used for that? That doesn't benefit we, the people in that state. We're benefiting the United Nations.
And
That's who's getting
generally,
the benefit of that.
to visit one of these sites anyway, you've got to pay, right? I don't know if it's there with you guys, but
Right, so
there's
you get a whole nother fee on top of
yeah.
that.
I mean, nowadays to go and walk in my local forest, I have to pay. And that's in the last year or so that they've started this. It's insane. I mean, I can
Well, then
understand.
they're getting funds, so I mean, that's really where this is shifting. we need to look at our counties and our states' budgets, because they also get money from Congress for their state and county budgets. They get money for special projects that they want to do when it regards, like, renovations for land, for water, things like that. So they have to apply to Congress to get money for those projects and events, or whatever they're doing. They get money from Congress for that. So you also have your schools getting money from, in their budgets from Congress. So where is
Yeah.
this money going? What is it being used for? Does it benefit we the people at all? It doesn't. Like, that's the
Mm.
truth. It doesn't. You paying taxes on your house or your land does not benefit you. You don't get any rights in that. In fact, they're taking away your rights. You have the right to natural resources. And here's the truth. They, you know, they're natural. These resources are natural. They have so much energy. Like when we see California cutting off energy or limiting or regulating energy or water, all of that is a stealing of rights. There is absolutely no need that they need to do that. Even, DJT pointed out, you know, all the water. Look at all the water in the state of California. They've got beautiful rivers, lands, all of that flowing through national parks. Who is overseeing the national parks? UNESCO. It's classified as a world, territories, right? So connected to your UN. That's who had the waters in your national parks, or the land in there, right? That's who was overseeing it, as we've said with your brotherhood. Um, so they're taking away our rights to use the land and the water, and double, triple, sometimes quite even further charging us. You have to have memberships, you have to have parking fees, you have to then, you know, have yearly passes. Um, you know, you have to have a pass to walk on the territory, plus you got to have a parking pass for your vehicle to drive to the territory. Then you're going to get charged. Some of your states, you'll be charged a tax on gas or on food, other things like that. You get taxed for using the roadways. Um, but we're
And
just right now on the residential. We're going to really get into the residential, these taxes.
and especially here in South Africa, crime really pays the government, which is why they don't do anything about it. Because every time somebody breaks my car window, and whether I replace it myself or whether I have it replaced by my insurance company, the VAT, I don't know if you call it VAT, that obviously 15% goes to the government. So you get charged 15% VAT on every single thing that you purchase. The only thing there's no VAT on is fresh produce. So like fresh vegetables and fresh fruits and stuff, there's no VAT on that. Every single thing else, there's VAT on. So think
Right.
about how much that pays this big, fat, disgusting government of ours for crime in this country. And I'm
That's
sure,
unregulated.
totally, totally.
And, think of that, like California, what were some of the reasons they were giving residents? Oh, well, we have to outsource the energy. So it's like we have our power companies, and then they have to send it to another state or somewhere else. And then, there has to be money to pay for that, right? So they say that they're paying to outsource it, but then we know it comes back, and it comes back with, you know, they're charging fees for that too. So they're hiring our monthly bill, we're getting a tax on it to ship it out, and then they're regulating the amount that we can use of something that we have a natural right to access and they have unlimited energy. That's the truth. They have unlimited energy. There should be no reason we are having to pay for it at all because there's a mass amount of it. It's an endless
Exactly.
resource. It's
If
endless
you look,
resource.
if you look in South Africa, and this country should be running on solar power, because yet when you go to the rural areas, right, and I'm talking about what they call low-cost housing, like generally for the African people,
Mm-hmm.
where they build little houses that look like shoeboxes, one next to the
Right?
other. Each and every one of those houses has solar power. Yet, when you look at the cities and your more upmarket areas, if you want solar power, you have to pay for it. There are companies that put it in at a large cost, right? But you've got to pay to have solar power installed. Yet we have had for decades a huge energy crisis in this country with Eskom that now cannot provide power for the country, but supplies all our neighbors with power, by the way. All our neighbors don't get load shedding, but we haven't had load shedding for about a year now, I think. It must be around about there.
Right.
But for more than a decade, we've had one energy crisis after the other. We've been told, switch off this, switch off that, load shedding at this time. I mean, we've been traumatized to the hilt because of no energy. And why not? You see, when we look at this, it's ridiculous because in a country, especially like South Africa, we should all be on solar power. We really
Yeah.
should be with electricity as a backup. If you have a week of rain, which some places do have, so you should
Right?
have electricity, or Eskom should be a backup. We should be using our natural resources totally, and I'm sure in America
Yeah.
it's the same.
And who's using those? They are. That's the truth.
Like,
They're using it and everything that, it's a way that they are making money off of us. Um, you know, and it's as we saw, I mean, think about that, if we applied that same thing, and it's going to vary, by counties or, even internationally. As you go international, the amounts are going to vary. But if that was the average, 1 million, because Anoka County is a very small county, if that's the average, I mean, think about that applied worldwide per a month. And yet they tell us that we're trillions of dollars in debt, and yet just by, if we reapplied that money, we wouldn't be in debt. We would have a mass amount of money left over available to each county that we, the people, could use. I mean, when you think about that, if that money were reapplied,
health
every
services.
person in every county, your house would be paid off. You'd have a house, you'd have a car, you'd have land, and you could have a garden, a homestead. I mean, you'd have what you would need to live. You wouldn't need to be paying any of that. You wouldn't owe
Exactly,
anything. You wouldn't owe
exactly.
anything.
That's
Um,
and of course, that's
yeah,
the whole system of debt that we've been born into, right? Is that the minute you're born, you actually are in debt already, and it's so true, you know. And also, if they reinvested in the public healthcare system, you know,
right?
where they took $2 billion a year that they just in one county collecting on stamps, stamps, right? If they just took that money and reinvested it into public health care, I mean, hello, we would not have a crisis on this planet. That's what we do. We're supposed to do, right? Um, But instead, people are being drained of every bit of resources they can. And they're doing it now more than ever. But it's all
Yeah.
part of this great reset, really getting people on their knees again. It's like a couple of years ago, it was COVID. And just when, and this is what we've been warned of, right? Is just when people are back on their feet again, businesses are up and running, um, things start going well, boom. And now with the wars, right? It's now one war after the other, one drama after the other. Human beings are being traumatized to the hilt with what we're being shown on television every day. And for some reason, we keep sucking it up. I don't know why we keep sucking it up. I don't know why we keep sucking up that poison. We should just turn everything off and say, no, I'm not watching that. Because
Right.
part of their whole fear mongering is to show us and loosh harvesting, for want of a better expression, is to show us as much fear porn as what they can.
Yeah.
It's just horrific. And they get us on our knees, and our children are suffering, and our animals are suffering, our parents are suffering. Everyone is suffering because
Our
the world
states are
economy.
suffering. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
our states are suffering. I mean, when we look at our schools, it's like we're not giving the best to our kids in the majority of our schools right now. Um, so you got to ask, like, if they're not investing in the quality um, of the lives of we the people, then why should we have it? We're not doing it just so someone internationally or so people who are, unlawful immigrants in our country can have the best of everything. You
yeah,
know, what about our children? What about our states? Those who are born here, like these are our rights, and are we going to give them away, including to a foreign military and government?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so we'll get more into this series. There's going to be a lot more breakdowns. It's a powerful, eh, um, presentation to understand what is happening, and then, we'll eventually get into what can we do about it. Um,
Exactly.
but share it. This should be known. Uh, you know, this is important
Yeah,
information.
exactly. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap this one up for now then, and then we'll see you back for Q&A in just over half an hour. So if you want to maybe just, I don't know if there's anything you want to wrap up with and end up for us in prayer.
Yeah, let's end off in prayer. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wisdom, this knowledge, this understanding. We thank you that we're not helpless, but that you empower us, that you show us these truths and you show us what we can do about them. We ask, Lord, that we may be those who call our areas to account, that we make sure that things are established and working properly, that we fight to reserve the constitutional and the natural God-given rights of not only our family and those around us, but also of our children, of our estates, our nation. Lord, they are so worth investing in. And Lord, we want to give our children what you would have for them, a future and a hope. And we ask that you would show us how to secure that for the children of our nations. In your name we pray, Lord. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Jessie, for sharing this information with us. Wow. And again, it's not only there, it's everywhere in the world they're doing
Yeah,
this. The,
right?
the systems might differ slightly, but I mean, we have over here pretty much the same system, right? Going
Mm-hmm.
on when you buy a house, taxes,
Right?
blah, 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 blah.
I'd be
Uh,
curious if it's based off the same tax. Like if you guys
yeah,
have the same, if it's the Stamp Act tax for you guys too.
we have revenue stamps that you have to buy and stamp on official documents. If
Okay.
you're buying a house or
So
stuff
you
like
have
that.
a revenue too that's
Wow.
collecting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, you know, just interesting.